Hi, my name is Dr. Michelle Maidenberg, and I'm here with Stacy, and Stacy's going to introduce herself. And we're actually just talking generally about racism and perspectives in the family. And I'm so happy to have Stacy here to talk. So Stacy, do you want to just, tell everybody kind of your story, and then we could get into talking more specifically
Sure.
about how it
Thank you.
impacts you.
Thank you for having me. Yeah, so my name is Stacy Quint. I have a biracial son named Jacob. He's 12 years old, and he is being raised in a Jewish home by me, a white mother. Jacob was born, his father is Caribbean, African American. Our relationship didn't work out, and he left when Jacob was 9 months old, and we haven't heard from him since. Um, and so Jacob has no knowledge of his father. He has no relationship with him or any members of his family. He doesn't know his paternal grandparents, aunts, uncles, cousins, anything like that. And that's fine. Okay, so we've adjusted to that. That's our family dynamic. Um, I was a single mother for 9 years with Jacob. I got married a couple of years ago to a man who is from the Dominican Republic, um, also white, basically. So Jacob is, he's the caramel in the coffee. um, you know, it's very hard to get him to identify with that side of who he is because we don't have that connection with that side of his family. So as much as I can promote black literature and black movies and television and encouraging him to be part of movements that are important, it's not organic. It's not the same because Jacob doesn't see himself as a black person. He doesn't even see himself as biracial. He sees himself as Jewish and as a human being. He knows he's brown, but that's, it's melanin to him. That's all it is. He in fact, he kind of tends to shy away from that because he is in a Jewish school and there are not many kids that look like him at the school. And being a preteen, all you want is to fit in and to blend and to not stand out. And when he looks around, he feels like he stands out. So he actually, tends to shy away from that side of him. As much as I can tell him, embrace it, you're beautiful, people go tanning to get to be your color and people this and people that. He doesn't, and when things like that have happened with this systemic, racism, when things like this happen in the news and the media and happen every day, whether it's in the news or not, we try to have an open dialogue about it, and he actually gets quite frustrated.
What does he get frustrated about? What comes
He
up for
gets
him?
frustrated, not so much when we talk about it at home, but when it's brought up in school, he gets frustrated because he feels like there's a real divisiveness when the kids talk about white privilege, and they have very open discussions about it. They use the pronouns, they use we, and they use they. So we represents the white people and they represents, the black people. And they're very sensitive and they have great insights, these young people, but he feels like he's not included in the we when they're talking and they're saying, yeah, well, we have enslaved black people and we have mistreated them. So even though they're acknowledging white privilege and that it's, a negative in culture and in history, they're still using the word that joins them as a force. and he becomes the they, and that makes him an outsider.
Mm.
And so he doesn't like it. And he with everything that happened with George Floyd, it was coming up a lot in school. They were talking about it in social studies, they were talking about it in their morning meetings, and as I'm sure all schools were around the country. And he would turn off his camera and he would just sit there and he would listen, but he felt like everybody was looking at him.
Mm.
um and it's hard. It's hard because I want to say, and so what if they were? And maybe they were, and so what? You have a story to tell, and you can come from a different perspective,
Mhm.
but he doesn't embrace that perspective. So that's the struggle that we're in our family,
Mhm.
unfortunately.
And it
you
sounds
know
like as a parent, it's interesting because it sounds like you want him to embrace that side of him, his
of
identity.
course, because he's so unique and beautiful and amazing and special, and that's part of what makes him that way.
Mm.
100%. And you know he doesn't hate it, but he just doesn't identify with it.
Mhm.
So I mean, I have talked to professionals over the years. I'd say over the last like 5 or 6 years, and
Mhm.
I've gotten different bits of advice. And
Mhm.
some of it, I take with a grain of salt, because it's very I don't know. I've been told, well, why don't you sort of call like the Mount Vernon Boys and Girls Club?
I'm
Or
I'm actually a board member there.
are you?
Yeah.
Oh, that's so funny.
Yeah.
Or why don't you call, Big Brothers, Big Sisters, and ask for, a young Black male?
Mhm.
Um, and it's very pointed. I mean, I, I don't know. I have a hard time with that. A friend of mine has her kids go to this fitness center in Harrison for kids.
Mhm.
And she was like, why don't you see if they have any Black coaches? And Jacob can do like little kids CrossFit with a Black coach. But I feel so silly calling up, hi, do you have any Black male coaches, preferably 25 to 35? I mean, it just seems ridiculous. And
Mhm.
we're sort of at a stalemate. When things happen organically, when he's at camp and there's Black counselors or Black kids, it feels much more real and much more natural, and
Mhm.
it's good. He likes that. He likes to be able to look out and see people that look like him,
Mhm.
and they come up to him and they say things like, what's up, my brother? And he likes that. I mean, as much as he doesn't embrace that side of him, when the opportunity arises naturally and it feels authentic, he does welcome it.
Mhm.
So that's the kinds of things that I want to see more of, not sort of like making that, intentional phone call to
Mhm.
solicit, Black people in his life to have an
Mhm.
influence, but to have it happen organically.
Yeah. What's the advice that you found was helpful? Because it sounds like that some people did give you some helpful advice.
Yeah, just to really, the best advice was to make sure you have the dialogue. Don't, just because he doesn't identify it, don't bury it,
Mhm.
because it is part of who he is. And maybe there will come a time when he's older,
Mhm.
whether it's high school and people think it's sort of cool because you have a little swag, or whether it's college because he's in more of a diverse setting. There will come a time that he probably will embrace that, or have a Black girlfriend and, maybe kind of feel connected in that way. And
Mhm.
so don't let it die. Don't just say, okay, he feels more like a Jew than a Black person, so let's just go with the Jewish. Keep the dialogue going, keep the conversation going. It doesn't have to be a choice.
Mhm.
Some days he can embrace it, some days he doesn't have to, but don't let it
Mhm.
never just die out and not be a part of who he is.
Mhm. And I love what you said because I also find, I find that sometimes the perspective is if you don't talk about it, it doesn't exist,
Right,
right? And I
right.
find that, sometimes, which I love what you said because just because we don't talk about it, it doesn't mean that our kids don't think about it and get impacted by it,
Yeah,
right? Because it's there.
it is there.
We can't ignore it. It's like the skeleton in the closet, right? It's and when you ignore it, you're actually communicating something subliminally,
Right,
right? That it's to be, it's it's to be shameful of, right?
right.
Or something like that, which could be very, very actually counterproductive and also destructive, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. I mean,
Mhm. Yeah.
I am just sort of like, I'm not going to go around the house, wearing a dashiki and lighting my Kwanzaa, candles, but because that's not who I am, but I'm also not going to, you know, abandon those things. And I'm going to provide opportunities for him to learn about it
Mhm.
without it, being so in your face, because
Mhm.
I personally, don't relate and don't connect. If his father were involved, that would be a different story.
Mhm. Mhm.
He would have the best of both worlds, but he's not, and so we have to take it from there,
Mhm. Mhm.
and that's it.
Yeah, and I'm curious also because yes, of course, a lot has come up lately about racism because of George Floyd, and then just again talking about what exists and has always existed, right? Um, is there any fears that you experience as a mom? Having like you said, a brown child. Does that come up for
Yeah,
you? And
it
is it anything
does.
that Jacob's expressed as well that's come up for him?
Well, you know, no, and that scares me too, because I want him to have a little fear, because unfortunately that's the reality. And
Hmm.
you know it terrifies me. It really terrifies me. I mean, the fear that I have is twofold, because seeing what's happening to young Black people, um, is very scary, and also seeing what's happening to Jewish people is scary. So when I see synagogues being vandalized and graffitied, and Jewish day schools, things happening, I get scared for him in that respect. And then I get scared for him in the other respect, being a young Black person. So we have to talk about it. Um, and, because they're children, you have to be very careful. Sorry.
Okay.
Um, this is Karen.
Uh,
um, so anyway, I, uh, I asked him, I asked him recently, what is your opinion about police? Do you think that they are an ally and a helpful resource, or do you think that they are the enemy?
mm,
And he said, no, I think they're positive. I think they're an ally. And I was like, well, that's good. I want you to feel that way.
mhm,
Um, but like with anything, that there's always going to be a few rotten apples in the bunch. What I don't want you to do is, because there's a few rotten ones, to feel like you hate all police,
mhm,
because that's racism in a nutshell. If you have a handful of Black people that are criminals, you can't say, well, all Black people are criminals, because that's generalizing based on a few rotten apples. And that's the same thing with the police. You have to just use your judgment and say, you know what, all police are generally honorable, decent people,
mhm,
but there's always going to be a few crooked ones. And you have to always assume that the ones that you're dealing with are the crooked ones, unfortunately. Um, and I told him about white privilege. And I said, when they stop you, if you're driving, and you're older, they're not going to see that you're, half white, or that you go to a private school. They're going to see you as a Black person, and you wouldn't want them to see you that way, because then that is exactly white privilege. They're going to see you as a young Black person, and they're going to treat you as such.
mhm,
And you have to be prepared for that. And and we've talked about it point blank, like the logistics. When you're asked for your license, you say, is it okay officer, if I go into my wallet, if I go into my pocket, you have to ask permission. It doesn't matter if it, well, of course that's where I'm going to go. That's right. No, you have to say, is it okay? And we talk about why you have to do that.
Mm-hmm.
And I say, your friends probably won't have to do that. And it sucks. And it's a shitty way to have to, face this world, but it is the way. And hopefully it'll get less and less and less as time goes on. But for right now, that's how you have to approach it.
Yeah.
And, you know, speaking of the police, it's like, for all of us, if we're driving and we see that siren behind us in the rear view, or we see the lights, we hear the siren,
Mm-hmm.
we are programmed for an automatic response of fear. Our fears are, oh my God, I'm going to get a ticket. Oh my God, it's going to be expensive. Oh my God, I'm going to get points on my license. My insurance is going to go up. If you're an adolescent, you fear, oh my God, my parents are going to kill me. If you're a spouse, oh my God, my husband is going to kill me. But when you're a Black person, it's, oh my God, I might lose my life. And it's the reality, and it's freaking scary as hell,
Yeah, and systemically, unfortunately, right, it carries over in a lot of places, right, all over the place, I'm going to say, and as a mom, I can't imagine what that must be like for you, and I think you're right. I was thinking as you're speaking, like, if a police officer stops me, it doesn't even occur to me that I'm going to lose my life. Like, that doesn't even,
No,
it's not even in the equation. But to have that fear, that intrinsic fear that you could lose your life because of saying something or doing something, and again, I think for you, it's almost like a double-edged sword, right? Because if you have a son who's not like kind of identifying that way, it could lead to less hypervigilance,
exactly.
right? And that
Exactly.
that sounds really scary. That sounds really
Right.
scary. And I know, speaking to other moms, and dads, white moms and dads who have, Black or brown children, um, it's also not really understanding it to the level, right, that maybe a Black or brown parent would, and feeling really frustrated, because as much as they talk about it with their children, it's almost, there's some disconnect somehow that
Of
they share with
course.
me. Yeah.
Of course.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So anything else before we end, that you wanted to share? And I have to say, like, what you were just saying before about, making it a point to talk about, but not over talking, and to being so sensitive, um,
And I think that's partly because of the age. I think
Mhm.
if he were 16, I would overtalk it, but because he's still young,
Uh-huh.
I'm trying to protect some of his innocence. I mean, he's on the cusp, right? Preteen, so you want them to have the reality and the facts, but you don't want them to develop anxiety either. So
Sure. Sure.
it's trying to find that balance. And you know, I think we're doing okay with it. I wish he would embrace it more.
Mhm.
Um, his identity, his just the dialogue, being able to feel comfortable talking about it at school and not caring
Yeah.
if everyone is staring at him or anything like that. I remember in fourth grade, they were talking during Black History Month about segregation, and he came home and he was devastated and distraught. And he was like, "You're not going to believe this." And I'm like, "What happened?" And he tells me, "We were talking about the separate water fountains. And someone said, oh, so if Jacob was around in that time period, he would have had to have
Mhm.
drank from the other water fountain."
Mhm.
And I'm like, "Uh-huh. What else?" He's like, "That's it? I can't believe they said that. That's horrible." And I said, "Why is that horrible?" I think that that's amazing that the kid was able to make that connection, and he was able to personalize something that happened in history, and he connected it to you. And it's horrible that it happened, and that, yes, that would have been true for you, but he wasn't being racist. He wasn't calling you out on anything. He was making a connection, and there's nothing wrong with that.
Well, and I'm gonna even say even more than that, maybe the child also was trying to have some compassion, right?
Exactly.
Because if you're
Yeah.
talking about a child out there, it's like you can't really connect to it, but knowing that, you know, a
Like,
child
my
just like him,
friend.
yeah, a friend, somebody he knows, could be treated that way is
Yes.
like unacceptable, right?
It was, I saw
Yeah,
it as a positive, and I
yeah,
tried to make him see it that way. But
yeah.
any attention called
Mhm.
to that, it makes him uncomfortable. And that's what I'm sort of trying to get him past.
Yeah, and I'm gonna kind of close off by saying this because it's almost like I feel like we've come full circle because the fact that he has to feel that he has to cut off that side of himself
Yeah,
because it's undesirable or less than speaks for itself.
I know.
I mean, look what we're talking about here. I mean, that makes
I
me
know.
sad actually saying that,
I know. I know. It makes me
right?
sad.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, if you really, when it comes down to it, if you really think about it that way, if he were white or whatever, Latino or whatever, like, would he then feel that way? Yeah.
Yeah.
So that's just, I mean, if you think about it, that's really sad.
I know. I
Yeah.
know. I
Yeah.
know.
And, hopefully with maturity, like you said, with maturity and age and, health, and hopefully the world will change, and only because we're making change incremental and proactively, I'm going to say that he'll be able to, kind of embrace that side of him.
One other funny, not funny, but one
Yeah.
other thing that starting to get him to do
Mm-hmm.
is, when he texts his friends, if he does like an emoji with like a face or a
Mm-hmm.
fist or like a thumbs up,
Yeah.
he always does the first one, which is like yellow.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I've gotten him to go down the line because, they have different
Yes.
colors.
Yes. Yes. Yes.
And I said to him, because he texts me with those, and I say, why don't you put the brown face or the brown fist? And he's like, I don't know. I said, but that's, if it's you giving me a thumbs up, your thumb is brown. So use that emoji. It's something so silly and so trivial, but
It isn't. I mean,
it's
it speaks to what you're saying, right?
right. And it's
Yeah.
like so topical for the day and age that we're in. But it's
Yeah. Thank you, Stacey, so much for sharing your story.
thank you for having me share it.
Yeah, and it gave me so much to think about, I have to tell you. It really did, because it's a little bit of a different perspective also,
Yeah.
So I really appreciate it, and I was really happy to hear your story because I didn't even know it before.
No, I'm honored
Um,
to tell it. Obviously I can't speak, from the perspective of a Black person, and I don't take anything away
mhm.
from that perspective. Mine is just a different one, so I'm shedding my light on it.
Yeah. So again, thanks so much. Really, really appreciate it.
Anytime.
Okay. Have a good weekend.
You too, take care.